that was trying for me with God, because I had struggled through 5 years of barrenness after that first miscarriage, where nothing had occurred. And then there I was, off the heels of one miscarriage, about to go through another one, and struggling to understand why God would have given me this gift of life that I was carrying, that I was experiencing, when I was crying out and saying, I would have been better off barren, not experiencing this, not hoping for this, not longing for this. And so it happened. I miscarried, and I went through the pain of that physically. It was very painful. And I remember speaking with you and saying to you all the things that the people in my life were coming to me with, trying to find answers, trying to help me explain why God was choosing to do this to me, or potentially why I was choosing to do it to myself. That the pain that I was experiencing was my own doing, that I wasn't praying the right things, that I wasn't asking for the right things, that I wasn't listening to God, or that God was doing things to me to turn my heart in a new direction. And while they were all speaking truth about God, it just wasn't truth for me. It wasn't applicable in my situation. And I look back on it now and I understand that I think what God was doing was in the hearts of everyone around me, not just myself, was that He was showing them that man didn't have the answers. No matter what we came up with, there were no answers. So I kept praying. So why? Because I know that I have my babies up in heaven. I know that I have that big family that I've always prayed for. I always wanted 3 to 5 children. I know that they're up there in heaven, but Lord, I want them here. And so I kept praying, and I ended up pregnant again. Only to find out that it was going to end as an ectopic pregnancy, which meant certain death for the baby, if not me as well. So there I was, again, within a year period, 3 miscarriages, crying out to God, saying, this is how you mean it to end? A year later, you mean it to start with death and end with death? Is that really what you're asking me to do? And I kept finding myself saying, so be it, so be it. And then He started leading me to Hannah's prayer, over and over again to Hannah's prayer. And I couldn't understand that, how I could be walking through another miscarriage and hearing about Hannah's prayer, where she prayed and prayed and prayed for not just a baby, but a son. Despite the torment that she had received from others in her life, despite the fact that her husband loved her, she still wanted a son. And so I wrestled that out and I said to God, fine, I will pray it, but I'm not going to pray for a son. I will pray it. And He continued to lead me to Hannah's prayer, including at Vacation Bible School that summer. What on earth does Hannah have to do with teaching a bunch of children about God? What the demonstration that we were to do with the children, to help them relate to Hannah and what she might be going through. And we were taken into the room, and we were lined up as adults across from the children. And the children were lined up in front of us, and we all had to hold out our hands. And the children's hands were left empty. And they came to us, the adults, and they filled our hands with mounds of candy. And these little kids, their eyes got so wide at the fact that they had nothing, but they stayed there with their hands outstretched, waiting, just sure that that they would be given candy, that their hands would be filled. And I remember standing there in that room with my hands filled with candy, looking across at the little girl across from me, and looking at her face and thinking to myself, oh my goodness, that's me. I'm that little girl. I'm God's little girl standing there with my hand outstretched, just waiting for him to fill it. And I saw myself through God's eyes, just waiting, just waiting. But I had decided after that miscarriage, after I had to endure the ectopic pregnancy, after I came away from it with feeling just thankful to be spared my life. In August, we were at a family party, my last inner circle that has walked this walk with me. And I sat there at a table with my aunts and with my mother, asking me to recount the journey and asking for those answers, looking for me to give them to them. And they said to me, I will never forget it, as they were giving me their advice and telling me I was praying for the wrong things, I will never forget, I couldn't speak anymore. I had nothing left to say to them. And I just sat there trying not to cry and feeling so alone. And I remember my aunt said to me, do you really still believe that God will do this for you? I could barely speak. All I could say as the tears flowed down my cheeks were, yes. And that was all I could say. And that's where the conversation ended. I had no idea what God was going to do that very weekend for me, but I knew that above all, I was asked to give up everything else in my life. I was not going to give up my faith in God. And at that point I said, well, they all think I'm crazy now. I'm even starting to think I'm crazy, Lord. Are you going to give me that son? Because I just refused to not proclaim my faith in God. And so, a few weeks later, I would take a test to find out that I was pregnant. And I remember that mix of emotions, that joy, and immediately followed with the reservation and the preparation for the heartbreak. And I remember crying and crying and crying with God and praying to him from my own heart, Hannah's prayers. Lord, I knew that it was a boy, and I remember praying to God saying, Lord, don't take him from me. You've asked me to release all the others before. Please don't take him from me. Please allow me to have him in this life, and if you do, I promise I will dedicate him back to you. And so day by day, I watched it go by. I could count that pregnancy. You could have asked me, and everybody knows at any point during that pregnancy, how are you doing? And I could tell you the exact day that I was. I'm 24 weeks and 3 days, or I'm 37 weeks and 1 day. I knew every single day I prayed through that pregnancy. And my girlfriend, my very good friend, one of my best friends, who is my OB, as soon as I told her I was pregnant, she said to me immediately, Jen, this is your Samuel. This is your Samuel. Because in 1 Samuel 1, verse 20, it says, and in the course of time, Hannah prayed, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. And she named him Samuel because it meant God heard her prayer. God has heard. And I knew as I prayed daily through that pregnancy that God had heard. And the best part about it was that everyone was praying along with me, because there were no answers for what was happening to me. And so everybody was praying in faith that God would just fulfill his promise to me, that God had asked me to pray this prayer and that he would fulfill it. And so everyone prayed with me right up until the very end. It was all God. Everyone was praying start to finish, for that little boy to be born. And so I've come to realize in the months since, now that I'm no longer in that sleep-deprived state, when I look back on it, and I still pray daily, thanking God for this incredible gift that He's given us, I realize the miracles, all the miracles I've seen God do in my life and work in my life, that they were inextricably entwined with my faith. You know, and I've read it several times, many times over, both in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament, that it was through people's faith that God was able to perform these miracles and do such miraculous deeds. But I never realized that what He was doing on this 7-year journey, from the start of the first miscarriage in 2005 to the birth of my son, that what He was doing in me most of all was developing my faith.